Hey everyone. Hey, can you hear us well? Can you see us well? You have a little chat on the right hand side. Okay, that's great. You're used to it now. Thanks. Maybe we're going to wait a few seconds for everybody to connect. And then we're going to start. Chris, do you want to say a few words while we wait?
Sure, yeah. I certainly hope that this is as awe-inspiring as yesterday's solar eclipse. So let's hope.
That was dope, right?
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Okay, great. So just before we start, just to give you a few details, if you have any technical problem, let us know. You can write on the chat here. You can also write on the SEO Square website. We have a little chat button. We have team members that are here to help you. We'll do everything we can to help. So yeah, let us know if you have any issues. Also, you will have the replay of the conference by the end of the week. So of course you can ask for the replay, but you're gonna have them. So yeah, also practical things. If you have any questions, you have a little question tab on the right hand side. Feel free to ask your question. There are no bad questions, so go for that. And if you want to vote for the most relevant question, that's going to be pretty helpful for Chris and I to answer the questions that are the most relevant for you guys, for the audience, so we can prioritize them, because I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to answer all those questions. Yeah, I think we can start. I'm going to share the deck and we can start. Okay, here it is. Okay, so today we're going to talk about international SEO, how to perform from local to global. Maybe a few words about us. Chris, you're the guest, so I'll let you do your speech first.
Thank you, Corentin. Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon for everyone across the globe, hopefully watching us today. My name is Chris Philp. I support the leadership team across the Dentsu US SEO team. Really happy to be here to talk global SEO and some of the ways that we can help your brands really get superpowered.
Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty amazing. Chris is humble. He's working with so many amazing companies that he has huge experience. So that's going to be amazing. My name is Corentin. I'm in charge of international development at Semji. I'm working in the SEO digital industry for 10 years. At first on the development side, and for us in the SEO specialty for a couple of more than a couple of years, 7 years now, 8 years actually. So yeah, pretty good experience. As you can hear, I'm French. I live in Montreal, working with a lot of US clients. So I'm all in globalization. That's my daily life, and I'm sure, Chris, it's yours too. So maybe a few words about Dentsu. I'm pretty sure you all know Dentsu. That's a big company, but yeah, Chris, a few words about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to mention the Scottish accent is what you hear. So again, Corentin and I were laughing just before we started that we look like we've got different accents speaking to a US audience. So I've got experience with Dentsu for around 14 years now, originally in the London office. We've got around 500 plus experts within SEO across the globe, understanding the differences between traditional and non-traditional search engines. So understanding, again, the full experience of search when it comes to that. Understanding, of course, some of the various CMS platforms that exist. There's a number of them, and we have to be very well attuned to understand the optimization levers that we can pull. We're very lucky to have a number of global clients that you can see on the screen here that we're incredibly happy to partner with and really support from that global international SEO standpoint to make sure that we're optimizing not just for the largest markets, but for all the various markets that our brands perform in. And again, with our scale, we're really lucky to partner with a number of the best platforms, tools, and technologies, including Semji, which really help us deliver against some of the needs within the industries, within the markets, and really delivering some of those expectations that clients have when it comes to their SEO program. For a little bit of chest pounding, let's say, we're obviously very proud as an agency to be recognized by the likes of Forrester as some of the leaders within global search. Most recently, we were recognized by MediaPost as the Performance and Search Agency of the Year. So again, I promise you're in very good hands with Corentin and I, and we're looking forward to digging into the material.
Yeah, congrats about those prizes. That's great. For those who don't know about Semji, we are a tool. We said that before. We are an all-in-one AI-based platform for your content SEO strategy. used by a bit more than 400 clients all around the world. Basically, our clients use us to identify, prioritize their content actions, but also to guide copywriters through Google's expectation, through the audience expectation, because that can be a bit tricky to know what the audience is expecting. We also help our customers to be as productive as possible, because as you know, producing content can be pretty time consuming. So we use some GenAI features to help you on that, really quality focused. And we can also help like more CMO, CDO type of people to know what's the result, like what's the return on investment of each of their content campaign. So yeah, basically that's what we do. And we work really well with agencies or in-house teams. But enough about it. I think that's not the point today. Let's tackle the main part. So we're going to be as practical as possible. We're going to start with the organization part and then the adaptation part, so content and everything else. And we're going to finish with best practices, pitfalls. As I said, if you have any question, use cases that you want us to answer at the end of the conference, let us know in the question tab. Yeah, I think we need to go now. That's the moment, Chris.
Perfect. So we want to begin with setting up for success. There's a number of components that we really need to understand before we engage with any type of international SEO program, from research to contextual understanding to understanding the market itself. So with that, onto the next slide, we can show some of the framework that we really wanted to kind of set the grounding in. So interestingly, one of my colleagues within the French Dentsu offices actually presented with Corentin a couple of weeks ago and used this image, which I think is really appropriate in demonstrating the importance and value of having a partner alongside you when you're trying to engage within different markets. So again, given that there's the Olympics happening this summer, we felt it appropriate to keep this image in. But again, it speaks to the fact that even between our agencies, we were able to adapt the content to make sure that we can deliver it for this audience and really make sure that we're speaking to the right people in the right way across the right markets. So when it comes to some of the checklist components, there are three real critical elements that we need to consider. So there's the considerations, there's the planning, and then there's the operational activation. There's the basic components that we really need to understand, such as what number of markets are you looking to engage within? What's the priority, the size of the markets, the scale of those markets, the market objective, and even understanding, for example, the market maturity and the expertise, not just of your own brand within that market, but of the search experience, of your team's experience with various platforms. We need to be able to understand that to make sure that we can deliver on those strategic components. Now, from there, that's where, again, defining the strategy, understanding whether or not there's the budget to have a centralized team that's maybe got multiple language speakers within a single team, within a single market, or as with Dentsu offering, we can have, for example, feet on the ground within a local market that can speak to a local team within their local time zone. So again, depending on budget, depending on availability, depending on scale, some of those components are really critical to understand of the best opportunity to engage from an international standpoint. Again, organizational alignment is really important, making sure that there's no disparate or independent teams working in silos and potentially impacting another market's performance through inaction or action that might be leading to bad user experience. Again, with any international campaign and with any campaign generally, there needs to be clear sets of rules when it comes to ways of working, so that, again, there's no rogue country, for example, creating content that's not necessarily replicated across each of the respective markets and appropriately tagged with the various coding. And again, finally here, from an operational activation standpoint, making sure that to the best extent possible, we can train our client teams and provide guideline distribution across the agencies and across the stakeholders to really make sure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to both the execution of technical components as well as the creation of content for each individual market. I mentioned technical implementation. That part is absolutely critical. And I see within the chat here, a few people are speaking about hreflang, and that is obviously one of the big levers that is critical within any international market to, again, make sure that the right consumer in the right market is seeing the right content.
Yeah. Even if that's not enough, hreflang is not enough. It's exactly one, but that's not all.
Exactly. And again, Corentin is going to be talking a lot about the content strategy, the alignment and things like that. But again, we need to understand what is the language people are speaking, but not make sure as well that we're speaking to them in their local native tongue with an understanding of some of the various nuances. And then from there, really critically, again, I mentioned some of the tools and technologies that we partner with. It's critical that we have an understanding of the tracking and performance to make sure that, again, If there are any anomalies, if there are opportunities to share, we do so, and we do so in a unified way.
Yeah, and maybe a quick tip, anticipate. That's going to take time. Once you have that checklist in mind, when you start thinking about internationalization, take that checklist and anticipate. Otherwise, if you start and try to work along the way, that's going to be pretty painful.
Exactly. So overarchingly, people and tools are such a critical part of what we have to consider when you're a brand, when you're an agency. And again, I mentioned it already, but that idea of centralized versus localized support is really critical, that you understand the budget availability as well as the need within each dependent market. Because, for example, and typically, and maybe this is a bit too broad, but the US and the UK markets are typically among some of the biggest markets when it comes to the search demand and search interest. So from that perspective, it's easier, let's say, to staff within those markets. And again, from a Dentsu standpoint, let's say there's a lot of multiple language speakers, both within the US and within the UK market. So there's that opportunity to have a centralized approach that, for example, minimizes the need to spend to have specific boots on the ground if there can be a distribution among the internal teams at the client side. However, there's also the need, for example, if there's a campaign that is truly global from US to Australia to India to Japan, to make sure that there is the appropriate support and kind of local level knowledge and experience, both from a time zone perspective to make sure that you're not meeting at 7 in the evening, but making sure, again, that we've got that understanding at that local market level of what the nuances are within search, understanding, for example, how the behaviors, DMA, GDPA, all impact the behavior, the experience, and the ways that people interact. And again, that's really where some of the tools and technologies come into play. And I mentioned Semji is going to be showing some of the opportunities for adaptive content and making sure that we speak to those audiences. But again, even from a tracking standpoint, it's really critical that we align and centralize and homogenize some of those ways of working so that we can, again, simplify reporting, understand some of the same metrics so that we're not inconsistent with our technologies, performance tracking, and understanding of what the data means.
Yeah, and I was talking about anticipation. Here, you want to anticipate at first, because that means that maybe you will need to change the tool that you are used to using. So yeah, anticipate all of that, because that's a major key to success.
And again, depending on the scale of your brand, of the desire for the goals and growth potential, these tools obviously are inherently costly. So there's a number of tools that are both enterprise and lower level that allow you to be able to get some of those components. So it really does depend, and it's critical to work with your agency to make sure that you understand which is the optimal one to move forward with. So once you're able to understand some of those components and really get started, the research and auditing phase begins. It's really critical across all the markets that you're planning to operate in that you understand the search intent and behavior analysis. So for example, there might be a certain holiday or season that might be happening within one market that doesn't happen in another. We need to understand some of those components and trends. So for example, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, things like that, that doesn't happen in the same way in every single market. And we need to understand some of the variance from a holiday standpoint that might impact search opportunity, performance, and expectations. So that's really critical for us to understand the variances across different markets and make sure that we understand and capitalize towards that. In each market, there may be different elements of competition. So maybe your competitors in one market aren't really actually enabling some of the work that they could be. I think one of the things that I typically see, unfortunately, is that even within the US, the Hispanic market is often underrepresented. So there might be an English-speaking audience target page, but typically and often, more often than you would imagine, there's not a representative Spanish page that really targets that US audience. And again, there's so many different Hispanic speakers. The language specificity there is really difficult to make sure that you centralize and engage. So again, understanding some of those nuances within each of the markets is a really critical point.
Yeah. Sorry, and sometimes when you go like in Canada or in Switzerland or in Belgium, like let's talk about Canada specifically because it's more relevant for a US person, but you don't want to go for FR only, it's CA, FR, and we see that so often, yeah, it's CA, FR, and not FR. So you need to make sure that everything is really well set.
Exactly. And again, there's going to be variance within your performance and benchmarking across the various markets. So it's really important, again, utilizing some of those tools, technologies, and your analytics that we make sure to understand where you're starting from and how each market can support one another. And then from there, it's really about developing some of those strategies, whether it's technical, content, platform understanding, and really evolving from there. And again, from that operational phase, the technical crawl auditing is really critical. And depending on your subdomain or your domain architecture, rather, it's really important that we understand some of those schematics. And that's where, again, for example, hreflang analysis comes into play. We understand if there's any markets ranking within the wrong audience and making sure that we can deliver and optimize against that. The prioritization of content, again, I mentioned that there's going to be seasonal variances, holiday variances, and user behavior variances. We need to make sure that we account for that within our content and optimization. And again, just to reiterate that importance of reporting, we need to understand if we're creating content, if we're making optimizations from a technical standpoint, are we seeing the benefits? Are there any issues or impacts? And how can we start to kind of resolve against those? So with that, I'll pass back over to Corentin, who can talk about actually how we adapt the content, how we can make sure that we target the right audiences in the right markets and in the right way.
Yeah, you talked about creation, optimization, localization. That's all about that. So yeah, content, of course, is key to success when you want to localize your website in another market. So first, that's another checklist. You can have a screenshot here, or you want to take note, but you want to make sure that each time you go for a new market, you first define the targeted keyword for each market. You can just copy paste and translate the keywords that you want to target in the US, in the UK, or in Australia, or in New Zealand. Even if that's English, that's never going to work. So you need to define the targeted keyword for each market. Then based on those keywords, you want to produce an SEO brief. What's an SEO brief? That's everything you need to produce a performing content. So you will need to identify who are your competitors. You will need to identify for each of them what are the search intents, what are the result types, are the pages ranking, maybe product pages, category pages, blog, news, depends. The type of content required, what you need to write about to be legitimate in the eye of both Google and the audience. Are there some questions that you need to answer? All of that, that's within the brief. And then, and only then, you will produce your content that will meet the brief expectation, but also the audience expectations. That's, of course, related, but have that in mind. Quality first from an SEO standpoint, but also from a copywriting standpoint. And don't forget, and there is so many mistakes about that. Don't forget to create internal links. When you publish your content, it's not over. You will need to create your internal linking. Otherwise, you've done half the job, and that's you don't want to do that. So let's be a bit more detailed. First, you need to choose the right keywords. It's easy to say, not that easy to do. So here, that's a good example on different English-speaking countries, so US, UK, Canada, and India. India, it's a bit specific, but US, UK, Canada, let's say, for the same intents, sneakers and trainers, you use different keywords. So if you are a US company, your Foot Locker, for example, and you have your category page all about sneakers in the UK, you're gonna have a problem because that's not the query that the people are looking for. So same with cell phone and mobile phone. In the US, we're going to talk about cell phone. In the UK, more about mobile phone, things like that. So that's really related to the search volume. But that's not the only thing that you need to think about. You also need to think about like the intent behind a specific keyword. Chris and I, we are European people. So for us, football is related to Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Mbappe, things like that. You guys, like US people mostly, or Canadian people, you're going to think about Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, things like that. So for the same exact keyword written in the exact same way, we don't have the same thing in mind. So you need to take that into account, and not only the search volume. So you need to have that in mind to define the right keyword. Then you want to localize. So here, that's the main differences between translation and localization. That's going to be easy. If you want to perform, you don't want to translate. That's not enough. You want to translate and localize. Of course, it's going to be a bit more complex. It's going to be a bit more costly. But if you want to have performance, you need to do that. That's like, you can't do otherwise.
Yeah, and even for example, just some of the components around language, again, with Corentin and I being international, it's really difficult sometimes for us as searchers. So within the US market, for example, I often do a UK search, and I have to then go to Google UK to be able to get some of those components. So again, you have to understand that users are going to be searching for what they want where they are. It's not always going to be clean and easy, but again, that's why it's so important to make sure that we understand those nuances.
Yeah, So true. So let's take an example. Let's talk about cell phone or smartphone. So here, that's a good example of intent differences. So here I'm in the US, in New York specifically. Cell phone is a very transactional keyword. You can see Best Buy, T-Mobile, things like that. And on the right-hand side, we can see the brief. So here, that's the brief by Semji, because that's one of the features that we propose to our clients. So when you talk about cell phone, you're going to need to talk about the big brands, Verizon, T-Mobile. You're going to talk about prepaid, so very transactional topics. You can see here the compassion, so Best Buy, T-Mobile, Walmart, Verizon, things like that. So very transactional. And on the exact same keyword in the UK, we have Wikipedia. So that's not transactional at all. Here, it's very informational. It's like a comparison page. Here on the right-hand side, we have best phone to buy for 2024. We have the New York Times, so that's not really transactional. And so here, it's more going to be about what's the best cell phone or smartphone, Google Pixel, Apple, Samsung, things like that. So the intent is completely different.
And I would say, sorry, I would say here as well that the intent changes over time. And that's something that's really critical, because when I first moved over to the US, for example, cell phone was the exclusive term that a lot of my friends would use when it comes to a device like that. So over time, over the last 10 years that I've been here, more and more people are using mobile as the preferred terminology. So again, understanding that those things change is really important to make sure that you don't necessarily set one strategy, forget it, and ignore it. Things evolve and language evolves. So we need to make sure that we have a constant eye on that.
Yeah, Chris mentioned like optimization of contents before. That's something that you need to have in your processes. It's not finished when you publish your content on your website. You need to have a re-optimization process, maybe each quarter, each semester, maybe each year. But I prefer each quarter to make sure that all the big pages of your website are optimized all the time. So here we've done like a quick exercise. We've optimized a piece of content on cell phone for the US. So we use Semji for that. So here you can see that the content score, so the quality score from an SEO standpoint is 78. So we have a great piece of content that's going to rank. Okay. And if I just put that on a UK website here, exact same copy, exact same text, you can see that the content score is now 33. So that's never going to rank. Just so you have an idea, when you have a content score above 75, you will make 10 times plus traffic than if you have a content score below 50. So here it's 33, so that's never going to rank. Even more on this type of query that is really, really competitive. So you need to localize, and that's the type of result. Here it's one of our clients, only 11 pieces of content, so a small campaign, so that's not that costly, and you can see the results, and it's even better now. So localize, do not translate, but of course, it's easy to say. So depending on the type of company you're in, you're going to have different processes, like production is key. So centralized type of company, like you do everything in the headquarters, and autonomy type of company, you do everything per market. So you're going to have very different approach. So in the centralization type of strategy, that's the process, like the ideal process that you should be having. So first, you're going to create a master content produced in the headquarters language. So often it's English, but that can be German, that can be French, that can be whatever. Let's say in English, that's going to be 99% of the time. Then you're going to translate that for each market. And of course, I've seen some question about AI translation. You can do that, of course. Maybe you need to proofread a little bit, but AI translation can be very, very cool in terms of quality. Then you need to adapt. And for adaptation, your best friend is the SEO brief. You need to have a brief for each market. And based on that brief, you're going to adapt the first draft by a local copywriter, also to take into consideration everything that's cultural, to make sure that the content is also in terms of tone of voice, things like that, that's also adapted. And then do not forget the internal linking. We said that before. And you track the result and you re-optimize. We've said that before. So you need to make sure that this piece of content will rank and will perform not at once or for the first few weeks, but like maybe for years. That's the whole point of having an SEO strategy. It's going to be a bit different when you're going to be like in an autonomy type of company, like each market do whatever they want. So here you need to define your local content strategy. You can't copy paste the headquarters or the big country strategy. That's not going to work. So you need to define your own content strategy. So either you're capable of doing it yourself or you go to Chris because that's the agency job. So you need some expertise. So either you have the skills and the tools or get some help. Then you're going to have for each keyword that you want to target, you create an SEO brief. We've talked about it 3 times now. So that's important. Then you produce your content for each country. You create your internal linking and you track results, re-optimize. That's the same on this part. One last thing, and that's very, very important. You need to share your result and good practices between countries. You're not at war against the other countries within the same company. Often we see that, and that can be for political reason. But from an SEO standpoint, that's nonsense. You need to share best practices. You need to share your failures. You need to share what's working, what's not. So create a Slack channel, create like coffee meeting amongst SEO, things like that, but share. That's really important.
And even on that point about AI, I think that's something that's been a very hot topic when it comes to creation. I think the big critical thing to be mindful of is to be mindful, be aware, and don't necessarily overly rely on it. It's a tool that's really fantastic to be able to help generate ideas and drafts. But again, having that native view to check the content to make sure that it does speak properly, not just to the audience, but that it really resonates with what the brand tone of voice is. Again, the more that you can brief, again, that SEO brief, the more that you can be robust with that, the better the content can be. But it's really critical to make sure that you're not producing masses and masses of content that you're not keeping track of, that you've not reviewed, that you've not edited for that local language. So again, just those checks are really, really critical.
Yeah, quality before quantity always in SEO. I would personally prefer to have 10 pages ranking, but first on big keywords than 1,000 pages that will never rank. That you don't want to have ego, like I'm producing more than you. You don't care about that. You want to care about rankings. You want to care about traffic. You want to care about conversion, revenue. That's what matters. We don't care about producing 1,000 content if there is no performance at the end. Okay, important to have in mind. We talked about content, but content is not everything. It's important, but it's not everything related to SEO. So Chris, that's on you.
I appreciate that. So again, whenever we think about performance, it's really, again, as Corentin said, more than just content, and we have to understand the full experience that consumers have. And when it comes to, for example, the differences across various languages, various cultures, various countries, there's going to be a different expectation when it comes to CMS, architecture, and user experience, for example. So again, we talked earlier about the flexibility and need for that, and making sure that, again, within a CMS architecture, within the structural components of things, there's the ability to cater towards different market expectations, different consumer and language expectations. So again, it's not just simply a case of translating it and done. From there, there's different ways that people engage. And again, that's where the UX component comes in, because there might be a different market, whether it's an Arabic language, for example, where the conversion buttons are either colored differently, placed in a different location, the expectation is different, where the cart on the Western market might be on the right-hand side, it might be on the left-hand side for an Arabic-speaking culture. So again, there's all these different components that is critical for us to understand, that goes really beyond just that content translation, adaptation, and making sure that we're speaking to that native audience. And we spoke obviously a lot about adapting content that exists, and translation, transcreation, and making sure to speak to the right audience. And one of the important things I mentioned earlier is that, again, we are experts within search, not just in the traditional engines of Google, of Bing. We understand and need to understand the differences in consumer behavior when it comes to the likes of YouTube or TikTok or any other platform that's around the globe. And again, I think Microsoft here is a great example where they've not just taken content and translated or adapted it, but they've been very specific to their audiences. So from a US standpoint, from a French standpoint, they've created content specific to those consumers based on what they're looking for, based on what their engagement preferences are. And again, making sure to not just create and recreate, but to adapt, to create new, and make sure that, again, they're speaking very directly to their audience based on what they're looking for, how they're looking to engage, and making sure that they're doing so appropriately.
Yeah, and maybe a quick tip, like a level up tip. If you want to reuse or repurpose your long form content, like you have an how-to guide, a huge guide like this, maybe you want to have the same on your YouTube channel, for example, or on your TikTok, because you already have what's behind. You already have the information. So the multi-channel type of strategy is really interesting when it comes to, of course, SEO traffic, but also cost effectiveness.
Exactly. So with that, we want to spend some time on some of the best practices and considerations when it comes to, again, adapting content, considering global SEO strategies, and making sure that you're actioning in the right ways possible. There's a number of critical considerations that, again, sticking with the Olympics theme, that we want to make sure you avoid a false start. So again, the technical foundations and flexibility, you've mentioned, that's really critical. A piece that we've not really fully focused on, but I think equally, especially with the European markets, is the importance of understanding local legal parameters and considerations. And then again, the differences in consumption habits and behaviors. And again, even when I consider, for example, the pitfalls, every large multinational brand, I think, has made some in some way, shape or form. One of my favorite examples of that is, I'm sure some of you have heard of the example of Pepsi, who in the 60s had a campaign that was around Pepsi brings you to life, or come alive with Pepsi, sorry. And within Asian markets, that translated into Pepsi will bring your relatives back from the dead. And again, that just shows the examples, not just across SEO, but across marketing campaigns, where if you're not really speaking to your audience and using that local language adaptation and review, you might be sending a message that is really potentially harmful for your brand, for your perception, and the fact that it shows that you don't really care. So again, making sure that you understand those local market nuances, the way that they're speaking, and making sure that you take that adaptation in seriously, it's really critical to make sure you avoid those missteps. Now, when it comes to domain structure, I'm sure I've seen within the chat a few people kind of talking about this and the importance of hreflang and structure, things like that. There's a number of options. We obviously, I think, as SEOs and digital marketers, have our preferences. Overarchingly, there's, of course, the country code domain, so that would be .co.uk. Things like that, that are very specific to the geographical market that's in place. So this, from an SEO standpoint, it's clear from a geographical standpoint that the targeting and optimization is for the UK market. So that helps send the signal, in addition to the likes of hreflang, that this is a specific UK website and therefore send the UK traffic here. But again, the challenge with an approach like this is that it's very expensive, and not every brand has the budget to both buy the various domains in each of the local markets, and it requires a lot of infrastructure. So that's one of the things that, again, is not always feasible or possible. There's the subdomain approach, which is uk.example.com, for example. Again, this is one that's typically easy for brands and for developers to implement. It allows for geo-targeting within Search Console. And again, there's that easy separation of sites. The pitfall here is that it's not necessarily the most optimal for passing some of that SEO value. One of my personal favorites, in conjunction where possible with the country code domain, is example.com/UK, for example. So the subfolder structure. Again, this one is typically easy to implement, allows for Search Console geo-targeting. It's typically low maintenance, assuming other components are in place correctly. And again, one of the big benefits here, especially for companies that don't necessarily have the full budget across all of their markets, is that some of the smaller markets can benefit from that .com domain feeding back into their smaller markets. So again, it gives them some chance to be able to rank within the competition if they don't, for example, have their own marketing budget that allows them to do everything on the same scale as the US or UK, Canada, etc. So again, this is where it's really important that we don't just ignore these components and understand the various technical components that are in place, such as hreflang, as everyone's been mentioning, that we implement those correctly, do the spot checks, and make sure that we keep monitoring those on a constant basis. And then the final part here, I don't want to go into this too much because the recommendation is please do not implement this. Your SEOs will hate you, your developers will hate you, but ultimately there is the opportunity and option to do a URL parameter for location. Again, this is not recommended, and if you do have this in place, I would highly recommend that you urgently speak with an SEO professional to make sure that you can right-size this and get into a place where you can deliver content in the right market, in the right way, and track it better.
And if you have an SEO expert telling you it's a good thing to do because Google is doing it, change.
Yeah, please do. Next up, I mentioned some of the legal requirements. And again, typically this isn't something that SEOs have to worry about as much, but I think it is important, especially when you're considering global market implementations and global market strategies. So of course, within the US, there's a CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act. There's a GDPR within the European markets. And there's some components here that really do impact the way that we understand search performance and some of the opportunities and levers when it comes to optimization. And I think the next slide kind of really demonstrates this. And as I mentioned, my colleague over in France had some of these visuals, and I think they're really great representations of, again, some of the limitations and challenges across different markets that are local and nuanced, that if you are trying to centralize everything and don't understand the local market, you're going to have a failure of performance. You're not going to understand why you might not be performing as optimally as you can. So on the left-hand side here is one of the impacts of what is called neighboring rights, where effectively websites don't want to be scraped by Google, and therefore we're not able to demonstrate or see the page titles, the meta descriptions, and you're only able to see the content once you're actually on the page. So as an SEO, I hate this because I'm not able to optimize for various keywords and make sure that I can help my brand effectively draw and attract consumers through that search experience. But again, this is a result of Google having a lot of challenges, especially within the European markets, of, again, copywriting content and kind of stealing content, as a lot of markets in Europe see. In the middle here, one of the impacts of the DMA, Digital Markets Act, is that, again, apologies for the small image, but within the images here, within the local results, rather than, for example, Google My Business within France, we're actually seeing results such as Expedia and other local third-party sites that are delivering some of that local specific content. So again, this was relative to the competition that that a lot of the European markets felt Google was strong-arming some of the other players within these fields. So as part of that kind of monopolization view, they wanted to make sure that Google was showing other third-party sites and not just their own assets. And then on the right-hand side,
yeah, one of the impacts of that is also that you will have different CTR with the same ranking on different market. Because if you have like nothing of that, like organic position number one, have no ads, nothing like that, of course your CTR will maybe about 30-35%. But here, if I don't scroll, I don't see the number one position organic. So maybe your CTR will be 17%. Maybe 20%, but that's it. So with the same ranking, you're not going to have the same results. So you need to have that in mind because like the analysis that you will do afterwards will be pretty different.
Exactly. And again, that's that further example here when it comes to the Google experience. So rather than just showing their own ratings and reviews components, again, this is an example where the third-party citation site is also pulled in from our ratings and reviews, again, to avoid that potential perception of monopolization that Google does have within a lot of our lives. So with that, I think we can go into the next phase of just really making sure that we can understand some of the key takeaways across the, oh, apologies, I think we'll
sorry. We did the same thing, I think.
So again, there's some key takeaways. Again, the best practice really is about understanding the priorities of the markets. There's not going to be the same budget in every market, and you need to be able to understand the priorities and potential tiering necessary to make sure that you can understand the ways that you support those markets and make sure that they're not necessarily left behind either. Homogenization of tools and working methods, again, making sure that across all of your various markets that you're engaged in, are they using the same metrics? Are they understanding the tools and the technologies in the same way? And again, what are the limitations within technologies, within the SERP, within the experience, and within the market that we have to be cognizant of that allows us to make sure that we appropriately right size when it comes to understanding reporting metrics?
You really want to be able to compare your different market, and if you're not using the same tools or the same tracking tools, that's never going to work.
Exactly. And again, that tracking component is really critical, making sure that, as Corentin mentioned, you're sharing successes, you're sharing failures, you're sharing challenges with other markets, because there might be some rule, regulation, or law that's happening within the European market, maybe a little bit ahead of the US. It's important for us to be able to understand, to share that, and to potentially right size and potentially reconsider the way that we're future-proofing our strategies. So again, share those strategies, share the successes, share the challenges, share the pitfalls, and make sure that you're constantly talking with one another. And then again, when it comes to some of the pitfalls, unfortunately, we see this a little bit too frequently, but there's often markets working in isolation. So somebody will have a bright idea, and it might be great relative to that market to create a piece of content that isn't then shared with the rest of the markets. But what we typically see is that if we don't apply the appropriate tagging, that piece of content, which is great for the UK market, may actually then also appear within the US and lead users to the wrong experience. So again, it's really critical to make sure that we do that and understand where the opportunities are to share. One of the components equally is around making sure that we translate content and adapt it. And there's so many companies and brands, unfortunately, that still just simply translate their content and SEO be damned. And it's easy as a brand manager, for example, to think that your job is done once you translate it. But again, you're going to see your performance tank, and there's so much opportunity if you speak to your audiences in the right way, in their right language, and in the ways that they speak. And again, we have to understand, as we showed earlier, that there is going to be variances when it comes to the algorithm across different markets. Google is always going to try and be as uniform as possible, but there's various restrictions, various limitations, and various behaviors that mean that there's going to be different results, different expectations, and different behaviors. So again, the difference that Corentin showed about the cell phone versus mobile, again, we have to understand those behaviors, expectations, differences, and nuance. And really critically, the last piece is flexibility. That is probably one of the most critical things across any international campaign that you need. You need to be flexible.
Yeah. And you need to be able to make every stakeholder within the company to understand why you're making things differently. Because like if something is working in one market, let's say the US, and you're going to talk to your CMO, US based, and you will say, okay, I want to do differently in France or in Germany. It will be like, why? So you need to have the arguments. You need to be able to convince. So you need to have the data to prove him wrong. I think we're already done. That's a bit sad, I have to say. We have 3 things to remember, questions, and then that's going to be it. So 3 things to remember. Scale your resources to match your ambitions. You can have big ambitions, but you need to have big resources. Time, money, flexibility, organizations, skills, all of that. Then you need to adapt in everything that you do, technically speaking, about content, UX, UI, consumption behavior, maybe even your product, maybe even logistic. You can go till there. Your pricing strategy, maybe. And you need to have a clear strategy that will be aligned when it's possible. So that means that you use the same tools, you use the same KPIs. We have not talked about it, but you need to track the same type of KPI. If a market is all about traffic and another market is all about conversion, that's never going to work again. So you need to define the KPI for everybody so you speak the same language. So align when it's possible. I think we're done. Thanks, Chris. Thanks you all. I think it was pretty interesting. We have lots of questions. If you want to go to the question tab and ask other question or vote for the question that are the most relevant for you, we're going to take, I think we have 8 minutes. So I think we're going to be able to answer a few questions. So yeah.
So I can start some off. I see here some upvotes for Kimberly Owen's question. So let me just start that one. So yeah. When it comes to speaking to the audience in the local language and their nuances, how much do you rely on translation technology versus human translation? Do you see it being impacted by AI? And if so, how? So I don't want to skirt the answer, let's say, but I think, again, it goes back to that component of what's your budget, what's your scale, what's your ambition? Because ultimately speaking, there's absolutely benefit in utilizing AI tools and technologies. But I think the critical thing for me is that there's not an over-reliance on them. Again, I would never recommend to a client to utilize an AI-generated piece of content, especially if it's mass-produced and kind of scaled, to then just go live. It's really important, again, if budget allows, especially, to make sure that it has that human validation, that human review. We've seen a number of tools and technologies produce genuinely excellent content that probably is close to in some verticals, at least 95% ready for publication. But again, the really critical part is to make sure that it fits within the brand voice, because if you're creating content that, for example, is super basic, like what is a credit card, there's so much of that content that exists. What is it that you specifically as a brand have the right to own, the right to speak about, and the right to be able to relate back to your other products? That's, I think, the piece that typically when it comes to creation using some of the technology, they don't always incorporate that fully. And there's ways to be able to brief that in, for example, into the components of the SEO brief when it comes to content creation, but it really does require that human check that allows you to be able to understand that. So again, it's it's something that we've seen prevalently. There are a lot of brands within search that are releasing content that's really mass produced by AI. I suspect that if they've not been tracking those, there's going to be a few elements where performance maybe declines. So it's going to be a changing landscape, but there's absolutely benefit in utilizing AI. But again, it just needs that local language, local native, and human review.
Yeah. I would say that you need to use AI in a qualitative way. So I would recommend like a 3-step process. Do your translation. That can be by a human translator or by AI. Honestly, like if it's pure translation, like the difference will not be that important. Then you need, because you're a brand, you need to have like a brand review, brand legal product review to make sure that what you want to say is what's written. And then you're going to have the SEO adaptation. So based on the brief that you've created, or that if you are a Semji client that you have on Semji's platform, then you adapt your piece of content and you publish it. So 3 steps for each piece of content. So as I said, you need to anticipate that, and you need to be as productive as possible. So AI can be a good help to be productive, obviously.
Exactly. So next up, Sally Wooten, do you have any recommendations for identifying different language variants, i.e. how would you discover if there's a different American English variant of a British English keyword? So this really comes down to that component of research that I mentioned earlier. So again, utilizing tools and technologies, whether it's Google AdWords to understand, again, variants within a specific market of keywords, the search volume behind those, understanding tools such as SEMrush and BrightEdge to, again, support with keyword research and analysis. They can provide you some work and some documentation to show what ranks within that market, what is the variant and keyword kind of volume and maybe difference between comparative terms. So there's ways that you can do that research. I'm always a fan as well of understanding some of the market research at a live level. So going into Google to type in some of these components and see what does the competition actually look like. So tools such as Stat can show you the full SERP landscape and show you some of the variances and the types of results that appear. Again, this is wherever possible, if you can get a native language user to be able to start kind of providing that insight through that research phase. So making sure that you do the keyword research, you understand the audience, the way that they're searching, the volume differences, and some of the nuances. So don't just take the data as read. As we mentioned earlier, the example of football, there's a ton of searches within the US, but you need to see what that truly means from a user behavior standpoint in different markets, because it leads to different results. So doing some of that experiential and qualitative review is really critical to make sure that you're not delivering content that's misinformed or mistranslated.
Yeah, I think this last part is really, really interesting. It's not only about the keyword, but what's behind the keyword. And maybe for same keyword or for different keywords, what's behind like the different topics that you should answer or that you should write about will be totally different, even if that's the same keyword. So you need to push the analysis a little bit and not saying, okay, that's the right keyword, and so I will talk about the exact same thing. Maybe you'll need to talk about, I don't know, let's say in my example, smartphone, cell phone. In the US, you're never going to talk about Huawei because there is some legislation about it. Maybe in Europe, you will need to talk about Huawei because that's a big brand, and even more in Korea or in the Chinese market, even more, obviously. So for the same, even if that's the exact same keyword, you're going to have different topics to write about.
Exactly. I think we've probably got time for one more, so let me just
go for it, even if we're late.
I know everyone's loving this one, I hope. So again, if targeting a different language in the same country, i.e. Spanish speakers in the USA, how should I set up translation, content, subfolder, or subdomain? So this one, I would say follow the existing site architecture that you have in place. So for example, if you're targeting a Spanish audience within the US market, there's a subfolder option, for example, that you could have .com/US/ES. So again, not to make sure that you're not conflicting with the existing Spanish domain, assuming you have one. So making sure that you folder structure within the US as a parameter. And again, that's where some of the geotagging can help apply, so that you're set up within Search Console. It recognizes that this is specifically a US Spanish language target, as well as the geotagging from a language standpoint to differentiate between the US, Hispanic, Mexico, Argentina, Spanish content, and making sure that they're set in place so that Google and other search engines understand that they're for different audiences.
Yeah. Nothing to add on that. Thanks. We're right on time. So to introduce the next conference, so maybe we can stop like answering the question live. Chris, if you can click on it, that's great. So first, thanks guys. Thanks for attending. I think it was pretty interesting. I hope it was helpful for you all. If you were here, that means that you have globalization process in mind or ongoing. So thanks again. Thanks, Chris. It was great doing this together. I think it was pretty efficient. Now we're going to have a 10-minute break. Then we're going to have an amazing session with Frank, Craig, and Matthew. It's a real use case. So Craig from Bodify and two brands, apartments.com and Getty Image, talk about how to convince your boss internal buying. How that's really important. You can have the best strategy possible. If nobody in the company believes in it, you're going to have a problem. So stay. That's going to be great. Thanks for being here and see you soon, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah. See ya.